Alright, so this knife thoughts video is going to be on this knife. This is the Gradation Cutlery Tidioute number 620220 in Unicorn Ivory Acrylic. And I did actually already do an unboxing video on this knife that some people saw, but you could see the addresses on the box, and some people said I might as well be safe rather than sorry, so doing another overview video here to replace that one. So this is the second video. If you haven't already, please do check out my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on lots of different things, knives, knife topics, stuff like that, as well as my social media, Instagram, Facebook, etc. at Knife Thoughts. Let's look at the knife here. This should be a good one for the people who say that I take too long to actually show the knife. It'll be right at 1 minute here where we're looking at the knife. And this is, like I said, the 62 Easy Pocket Congress from Gradation Cutlery. So this is a pattern that I haven't had before from Gradation Cutlery, and it is one that they are doing this year, 2020, right at the beginning of 2020, and I thought I'd check out. Now, I'm not the hugest fan of the Congress pattern. More so the reason why I decided to check it out was because of two of the different handle materials that they're doing. But first, let's talk about what a Congress pattern is. Well, a Congress pattern is an equal end pattern that has this concave side. It's only slightly concave on this 62, but then a convex curve, with the widest part being in the middle or the center, and then, the smaller ends here. And that's a Congress pattern. Now, Congress patterns often have 2 springs and 4 blades, like this Rough Rider that I got just to, check out the Congress pattern with the full 4 blades. And, there's different blade shape combinations that Congress patterns can have. I've seen one explanation of the fact that a lot of Congress patterns have the same main blade and then secondary blade shapes on both sides. So it would basically have 2 sets of the same blades. I've seen some people say that one set was to use for work and one set for your lunch. That's one of those things that it might be someone kind of like imagining an answer for why a knife is the way it is, rather than, based on facts or firsthand knowledge or, the person who designed it. Because it is an old pattern, a lot of times people mention the fact that the knife that President Lincoln was carrying when he was killed was a Congress pattern, a 4-bladed ivory-handled Congress pattern. So it is an old pattern. I'm not sure if that's why they often have, 2 sets of the same blades. Some people have said that the reason why it is called a Congress pattern is not because of, Congress, but because the 2 blades congress together. That's another one that I'm not 100% sure of. I don't know if there's, agreement on that throughout the knife enthusiast world, but it is one, suggestion I've seen as to why the pattern would be called the Congress pattern. Now, the only other Congress pattern that I've had from Gradation Cutlery is the number 13. This is the number 13 in smooth ivory bone with the office knife laser etch. And this is also a 2-bladed pen style figuration model. You see that it's also a single spring. One thing I was surprised of here with the size comparison is that the 62 is actually longer than the 13. I didn't realize that was the case, the 62 being called the Easy Pocket Congress. I assumed it was a smaller knife. Why it's called the Easy Pocket Congress? A couple reasons, I think. One reason being that it has these rounded bolsters in comparison to the square bolsters like on the 13 and on the Rough Rider that are more prevalent on Congress knives. Another reason could be the lowness of how the blades sit, which if you've watched my videos, you know that I like that. For example, you see that this knife, the blades sit pretty high and they can kind of stick out into your hand. The other thing is that they this knife and all of the 13s that I've had have come with proud tips. So that means that the tip is sitting at or above the frame, and some people don't worry about it as much as I do, for sure. I am definitely more sensitive to that than some knife collectors and people who are more knowledgeable than me. So that might be a personal thing, but I don't like it when the blades sit above the tips sit above the blade well. And so that's one thing that I haven't liked about the Congress pattern. So the 13s I've had through my hands, probably 4, I think, 13s, and all of them have had both proud tips and blade wrap from when they haven't been used or modified at all. So that's one thing that I didn't like about the Congress pattern, is that it seems that they often have proud tips and blade wrap, and it's just because of this shape here, and that's especially true on this 13. One thing to notice is that the 13 has a really full-sized blade for its main blade, whereas this 62, you can see even though the 62 has a longer handle, the 13 has a significantly longer blade. And so I think that's why the main blade on the 13s often had some blade wrap and proud tips. Not sure about the pen, why it sometimes has blade wrap, but that's not the case on either blades on this 62. So let's look at the pen blade. You can see that the pen blade actually sits pretty well within the frame, and it does have a cutout here for opening the blade, which I like. When a nail nick sits pretty low, I do like it to have that cutout. So I like how low that sits, and I'm glad that it doesn't have a proud tip, and it doesn't seem to have blade wrap. I checked it here in the earlier video. One thing I'm not sure that I mentioned about this being the Easy Pocket Congress, you can notice that the joints are sunk a little bit more so than other gradation cutlery knives, even this 13, and the joints are sunk. That means that this tang here sticks out less than on other knives, and so it makes it a little bit less catchy in your pocket and stuff like that. And then to look at the main blade, it sits actually really deep, so I'm really happy with that. That's not going to need the file dropped really, hopefully ever, especially with how deep this nail nick does sit. So I'm happy with that. Neither blade has proud tips. Neither blade seems to have any blade wrap, and I'm really happy with that. I hate to get a knife and have to decide whether I want to drop the kick or not, which honestly for me happens pretty often. Now, one thing that's interesting about this knife, first off, it's well made. I'll talk about this a little more later, but there's no gaps back here. But you notice that it has this wider scale or liner on the pile side, and that's because it's actually 2 there, and one of them is what GEC calls a cutout scale. So if we look in there, you can see that it's cut out. It's along there, and then it's cut down towards the spring, and the reason for that is so that there's more space for this secondary pen blade. You can see that it does come towards that side slightly, gives you more space for that pen blade, so that there's not too much rubbing. And as far as I can tell, I did just get this yesterday, but as far as I can tell, there isn't any rubbing on these blades. I don't really see any there developing, so that's a nice thing and a nice addition that they do. There was a good bit of discussion on blade forums about whether it was a catch bit or not. I think, from my understanding, this is a catch bit. So this thing here on the 13, you can see that it's not an extra scale. Let me open this blade too. You can see that it's not an extra scale. There's only one scale or liner on that mark side, but there's this extra piece here. It doesn't rotate. You can see why it has that block down there and then the block up here. But it's a spacer for this pen blade between the one liner or scale and the other, because the spring is thicker to accommodate for the main blade also. So that's a catch bet as far as I understand it, whereas this is a cutout scale. So that's the Congress pattern. That's how this knife is built. Now, as for the quality of it, it's really well made. Like I said, the blades are well fit. They, don't have any blade wrap or proud tips. They seem to be ground well and everything. There's no blade play on either blade. There's no gaps in the back spring really at all. I've checked it up against the light a couple times, and there's no noticeable gaps on that back spring or any of the liners. The shield seems to be fit well, which I think can be difficult on some of these acrylics. So I'm happy with how well the shield is fit. Some slight places where it's filled in, but definitely happy with that. And this is a new shield for Gradation Cutlery. The 62 in blood red jigged bone, which was the first one that came out in this run, had this same shield with the Tidioute stamp on it. So I think that is a good looking shield. Actually, it's similar to a banner shield. Maybe I would call it like a scroll shield. I don't know what Gradation Cutlery is going to call it, but to me it looks kind of like a scroll, like an old-timey scroll that you would write on. So that's what I would call it. I'm not sure what they're calling it. The pins are fit well. These are domed pins. This is a peened pin, or spun and peened, and it just is a good looking knife. Now, if there are any imperfections, it's that these scales are not necessarily perfectly fit up against the bolsters. Not that that's a huge deal at all for me. It's not even an issue. I don't consider it to be like a quality issue. If they got much bigger, then I might. But as they stand now, they're just a little bit less fitted to the bolsters than GEC's bone often is. And let's see. There might be like slightly more gap between the bolsters and the covers than on like this case trapper, and this is another good size comparison. You can see that the 62 is smaller than the case trapper here. So that's the only partial negative, is that the scales are not the covers are not perfectly fit to the bolsters, but it's not a big deal. You don't notice it really looking at it. You just notice it with your fingernails. And like I say, it's something that I do notice, but it's not like an issue. I'm going to talk about where it becomes an issue, or the level of gapping that I would consider an issue in a second here. But to talk about real quick some other size comparisons, I like to give these size comparisons just so you can see how this does compare. This is a 15, Gradation Cutlery 15, so you can see that the 62 is a little bit longer than this 15. Already saw the case trapper. Here is a Spyderco Native 5, smaller modern EDC knife. The Native 5 is a little bigger. And here is a Benchmade full-size Griptilian, which you can see is a good bit bigger. So it's still, in the realm overall of both modern and traditionals. It's a small knife, but it's not as small as I expected it to be. Now, why did I get this knife, especially considering the fact that I said that I'm not necessarily the hugest fan of Congress knives? Well, it's these handle scales, covers. These covers are the Unicorn Ivory Acrylic, which it's a faux ivory. It's an ivory replacement made from acrylic. I think that the reason GEC might call it Unicorn is because it has these really interesting crosshatch patterns that are a little different than real ivory, but it's also just a fun name. And I really like this handle material. I got GEC did a run of 25s, I believe, in 2017. It could have been it must have been 2017. They had a lot of trouble with them, and I think the reason for that, according to what Bill told me, is that those 25s didn't have a bottom bolster. They were a bare-headed 25. And so they had a lot of trouble with them. Most of them turned out being S knives or store models, and I was only able to get a store model at the Rendezvous. I ended up having trouble with it, and that's kind of what made me swear off S models in general. But I really like the handle material. I think it's really cool. I do think it looks pretty similar to Ivory with, just like I said, a little bit more cross hatching. So I wanted to get it to have some of this unicorn ivory acrylic in my collection, and I think it is a nice replacement for ivory. You can get that kind of creamy, smooth look with, without having to worry about where the ivory was sourced from. This ivory was sourced from Macecraft, which is a handle material supplier, and it's synthetic, so no worries there. One thing, it does seem like there's a little bit less polish right at this corner of the shield, but again, that's not a big deal. And honestly, that kind of thing, that kind of very light scuffing can happen from the insides of the tubes. That's one thing that I don't always keep my knives in the wax paper, but if it's not a user and it's not one that I'm willing to let get scuffed up, you should keep them in the wax paper, because cardboard is actually relatively abrasive. So if you're trying to keep a knife nice, I would keep it in the wax paper, which I have on this knife so far, but it's just something to be aware of, that you do want to keep them in the wax paper if you don't want it to get the bolsters and shield and stuff to get scuffed up on the tube. But I wanted to show you also another example of a ivory replacement, and this is my 2007 Gradation Cutlery number 73 in ivory casein. So casein is a very early plastic made from a protein found in milk, casein, and it has a similar kind of creamy look. Boy, I'm not sure that this is really showing you how it looks in person, but it is a really nice kind of creamy look to it with some character. You can see here there's some, I hope you can see, yeah, now you can see there's some lines. So I think that this is a really good ivory replacement, but it almost has less character and less of those like, again, creamy lines within the overall look than real ivory does. So I think that somewhere between these two is what real ivory tends to look like. But another thing here, so this knife is an old knife. It's from 2007. As GEC goes, it's an old knife, and it is in a handle material that it is finicky, this ivory casein, or casein in general. Now, when gaps between the bolsters and the covers become something that I would consider an issue, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it, but you can actually see the scale, the liner, if you look, with the right light, between this bolster and this cover here. And so this width of gap is something that if I was buying this knife brand new, I might have some, questions on whether that was within quality control. Now, again, because this is a unique scenario with this handle material, I did a video on it, but this handle material, Macecraft, the supplier, told me that it was actually, it's old stock. It was imported from overseas. They didn't make this handle material. So it's old handle material. It's kind of, like I said, finicky. It's an early plastic. So it's one of those things where even in this case, this might not be an issue. They've made fewer knives in this handle material than even in real ivory. But if this was an acrylic, a modern acrylic like this, then these gaps might be something that I would have an issue with. But you can see the difference, where it's pretty significant, the difference between the gaps between these two knives here. So I just wanted to show that, first of all, because this is another ivory replacement material, and then secondly, to show the difference in the gaps, and to show that this isn't, the gaps on this are not at all a big issue to me. So it's a knife that I'm happy to have gotten. I am planning to get the 62 from this run in, what are they calling it? They're calling it ripe banana bone. So it's not brown banana bone, but it's close to it. It's yellow with, it's like a deep yellow with some brown on it. And it looks like maybe what my wife would consider a too ripe banana. What I like them like that, pretty ripe. But for some people, I think they would say that that's not a ripe banana, that's an old banana. But it does to me look like a ripe banana. I'm planning on getting that because it does have the banana shield. Some people don't like the banana shield or its placement on the 62 as it's showing up, but I think it's going to be really cool, as well as I thought that this unicorn ivory acrylic would be really cool. I'm hopefully going to be writing an article on the 62 pattern from this run, so keep an eye out for that. Definitely go to knifethoughts.com, check out my previous articles, and subscribe via email so you get an email each time I post a new article. I really appreciate it, and I am planning to kind of send out emails to the people who are subscribed when I'm selling knives as like first, hey, are you guys interested in this? And then also please subscribe to my channel here. Really close to 1,000 subscribers, which I'm really excited about. And hit the bell for notifications. And then also please check out my social media, Instagram, Facebook, etc. at Knife Thoughts. And as always, don't forget to go out and do good.